Hello students, today we are learning about Islam, and Islam began in what is called the Arabian Peninsula. It's still the center of Islam and the heart, really, of the culture. You can see it here on the map, sort of wedged between Africa and the rest of Asia and Europe. Really, pretty centrally located. Perhaps that's why they call it the Middle East. So, before the creation of Islam, Arabia was populated, right here, Arabia. We call it the Arabian Peninsula. See, it all sticks out right there. But it was populated by nomadic tribes called the Bedouins. The harsh climate of the peninsula kept the people somewhat separated from their neighbors, but some cultural interaction and trade, so the spread of ideas still occurred. The Bedouin groups began forming tribes that traveled together and competed with other tribes for land and water. But by about 500 AD, these nomadic tribes began to settle down. We're going to learn about that more, how a lot of people were movers, really, until they figured out agriculture and farming. But they began to settle down. Farming became more commonplace, as did livestock and trade. As trade increased, towns grew at important trade destinations, or crossroads, or along the trade routes. The most important of these trading cities was basically what we know as Mecca. Mecca was not only an important merchant city, but the center of the Arabian religion. Within Mecca was the Kaaba, a square structure surrounded by statues of the many Arabian gods. The most important of these gods, however, was Allah the Creator. And this brings us to the origins of Islam. Islam arose in the peninsula around 600 AD, so about 100 years after they started to settle down. It is said that Muhammad was the orphan son of a merchant family within the city of Mecca, and that he was displeased with what he saw. There was greed and corruption, and you sort of had these upper classes and lower classes, and the upper class wasn't treating the lower class very well. Seeking answers to these problems, he went to a cave to pray. In 610 AD, he had a vision from Allah that called on him to preach Islam, which pretty much Allah told him all about. Muhammad went back to the city and began preaching. He claimed that Allah was the only God. He preached equality and good deeds. The leadership of the city did not really like Muhammad. They thought he was an upstart, going to cause problems, attracting the poor people like that, and his preaching might undermine their power and authority. So Muhammad and his followers left Mecca and moved to a different city, which they ended up renaming Medina. They left the city because they felt it was unsafe for them. There's them, and then there's the city rulers, and the city rulers still had all the power. But they moved to their own city, which they renamed Medina. Muhammad and his followers Muhammad was a skilled religious and political leader. He laid the foundations for what's called an Islamic State, complete with its own army. So he moved to his own city and started raising forces and basically his own sort of civilization in a way. And they went back and conquered Mecca, essentially. They took it over, and then they pretty much went on going through the entire Arabian Peninsula. By the year 632, the whole Arabian Peninsula, it's all this, was now Muslim. It was all Islam. So let's talk briefly about the practices of Islam. Like Christianity and Judaism, it has prophets that communicate the will of God. In Islam, Muhammad was the last and most important prophet. Now, according to Muslim belief, Muhammad had received messages from Allah for 20 years. But these messages were not actually written down until after his death. They were collected later, and they are written in a work called the Quran, which is the holy book of Islam. Islamic people practice the 5 pillars of Islam, which are belief, prayer, charity, fasting, and pilgrimage. You can see that all right here. A brief summary of Islam in the world. Now, it's hard to summarize the events of a whole religion throughout all of history. But know this, Islam spread rapidly, sometimes through conquest, sometimes through other means, and as it grew, different sects formed. Sometimes they got along, sometimes they didn't. Two such sects today are the Sunni and the Shia. Islamic kingdoms rose and fell, uh, coming into contact with not only other world powers or conflict, but each other as well. There were times when there were certain Islamic forces fighting other Islamic forces. There's actually a whole bunch of information on this in the textbook, but because we could only do Islam in a single lesson, it's not in this lesson, but you can read all about it in the textbook. It's actually chapter 14 if you want to check it out in your ebook. So that's our crash course history lesson on Islam. And if you'd like to learn more, go ahead. Up next is the quiz on Islam. It's nothing crazy. As long as you read the lesson, you should be good to go. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Otherwise, have a wonderful day.